Welcome back to Nourished Inside Out, the space where growth gets real and self-love leads the way. I'm your host, Aneta, and before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind you of something powerful. You are worthy, you are enough, and you don't need to wait for permission to love yourself fully. That's exactly why I wrote my book, Blooming with Self-Love, to give you the tools, affirmations, and daily mindset shifts to help you stand in your power and own your story. This book isn't just words on a page, it's a movement. So if you're ready to stop shrinking and start showing up for yourself, grab your copy today with the link in the show notes below, and let's walk this self-love journey together. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. Today, I'm here with Rhonda Britten. She's an Emmy Award-winner of 600 episodes of reality TV, a best-selling 4-times author of Fearless Living, and she's named America's favorite life coach. It's such an honor to have you on today, Rhonda.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited. And I love the name Nourished. And I've been talking about Inside Out for 30 years. So I'm so glad you called it Nourished Inside Out, because that's the only way you can be nourished.
Truly, like it all starts on the inside. You know, whatever you see on the outside, it all starts from how you're treating yourself from the inside. So I'm so excited to be able to dive into this topic today. And you're a life coach, an author. You've starred on many reality TV shows. Can you tell us what sparked your interest to personal development? Because I feel like a lot of times we don't go into personal development until we come across like our own challenges. So what was that motivator for you?
Well, I'll say this, that I read my first self-help book when I was 12.
Wow.
So my very first book that I remember self-help that I read, and it was so interesting because I didn't remember it until I was going around to publishers pitching my first book, Fearless Living. And an editor said, well, what's the first book you remember reading? Well, besides Harold and the Purple Crayon, I said, well, the first self-help book I read was Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? Which I find hysterical now that I'm an expert at fear. And so I read that when I was 12 years old, and I would read it over and over and over again. And I actually just talked to one of my dear friends from high school, and she brought it up, and she goes, oh yeah, you gave me that book. And I started reading it, thought like, what is this weird stuff? Because, we're 12 years old, right? So I have been doing that. But how I became, your question was, we usually have our own challenges, right?
Yeah.
And so how I became and did do what I do today is a direct result of the worst day of my life. So the worst day of my life, I do believe that the worst days of our lives have the seeds of our destiny.
Yeah.
And so if we look back at our worst days, we can always find that seed. And my worst day when I was 14 years old. And I grew up in a little tiny town in Upper Michigan, 365 inches of snow a year. It snowed this year on May 18th. That's what we're talking about. That's how much snow we had. And my parents were in the middle of getting separated, getting divorced. And it was Father's Day, and my father was coming to take us out to brunch. And I grew up in, like I said, a little town, had 2 restaurants, Douglas House Buffet Hotel and Big Boy. That's it. And my mother and I are in her bedroom. She's fluffing up her beehive hairdo and putting on her blue eyeshadow and putting on her rose-colored lipstick. And my 2 sisters are fighting it out in our one bathroom. My dad walks in the back door. Come on, because that's what dads do. And me and my mom start walking out, and it's starting to sprinkle. And so my dad says he's got to get his coat from the car. Now, you're way too young to remember Naugahyde leisure suit coats, but my father was going to get his Naugahyde leisure suit coat out of his trunk, and he had his polyester pants on, and he had his plaid shirt on, and he looked hot, right? He looked hot. He was a good-looking guy. And so as he opens his trunk to get his coat, I notice he is not grabbing a coat, but he has grabbed a gun. And he starts yelling at my mother, you made me do this, you made me do this, and he fires. And I start yelling, what are you doing, Dad? What are you doing? Stop. And he cocks the gun again, and he points it at me, and I absolutely believe I'm next. And he blinks, and I blink, and he blinks. And then my mother, who already has 1 bullet in her, sees the gun in my face and screams out with her literal last breath, "No, don't." And my father, realizing my mother's still alive, takes that bullet intended for me and shoots my mother a second time. And that second bullet goes through her abdomen, out her back, lands in the car horn. And for the next 20 minutes, all I hear is, and then my father cocks the gun a third time, puts the gun to his head and fires. So in a matter of 2 minutes, I was the sole witness of watching my father murder my mother and commit suicide in front of me. Now, I don't know how other people would respond, but this is how I responded. It's my fault because I was the only one out there that could have stopped it. And I did not grab the gun. I did not jump in front of my mother. I did not kick my father's shins. I did nothing but scream, "Stop, Dad, stop." And so in that moment, basically, I split into two, right? And it was the outside Rhonda and the inside Rhonda. And the outside Rhonda was fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Nothing. I'm fine. I'm fine. And the inside Rhonda, because she didn't save her mother, happiness is off the table because that's what happens when you don't save your mother. I had a lot of shame, self-hatred, guilt. And I, for the next 20 years, lived in this dichotomy of pretending I'm fine, but inside, self-hatred, guilt, shame, so much percolating that by the time I hit college, I started drinking, became an alcoholic, ended up getting 3 DUIs, and tried to kill myself 3 times. And it was the third suicide attempt when I realized I'm not very good at killing myself. I'm not dying. That means I'm supposed to be alive, which I wasn't happy about. But I just remember thinking to myself, well, there must be a reason why I'm supposed to be here. And by the way, when you try to kill yourself 3 times, they do put you in a psychiatric ward for evaluation. So they put me in a psych ward, and I was deemed not crazy. They let me go. And I remember going home to my little studio apartment. I was living by myself. Not a good idea when you're suicidal either. And I remember just thinking to myself, all the years that I was drinking, suiciding, and DUI, and I was also going to therapy, reading books, going to workshop. Remember, my first self-help book when I was 12. So I was a self-help junkie during this whole entire time. I was doing everything that I possibly could think of to change my life. And I'm a straight A student, so I gave it my all. And so as I was sitting, at home, just being released from the psych ward, realizing I had done all this work on myself. I had all this knowledge. But it didn't stop me from wanting to die, right? It didn't stop me. It didn't make me change my life. It just gave me knowledge and tools. And so I remember so vividly leaning up against the wall and like sliding down. I don't know if you've ever done that. You're leaning against the wall and you just slide down, you plop on the floor. And I remember plopping on the floor in such defeat and thinking to myself, I have to start over. I have to start all over. Everything I've done isn't working. There's nothing. Everything I've done isn't working. And so I asked myself, what do kindergartners do? And I said, well, they get a calendar and gold stars. So I actually went to the store, got a calendar and gold stars. And for the next 30 days, I gave myself a gold star anytime I did anything good. And I mean anything good. I'm talking about drinking and not getting drunk. Gold star, right? Getting angry and not breaking anything. Gold star, right? Like I gave myself any gold star for any movement forward. I didn't know it at the time that it was movement forward. I didn't understand what I understand about the process now. But what I was doing at that time was actually acknowledging myself and building my self-confidence unbeknownst to me. All I was desperate and trying to keep myself alive because I knew I wasn't supposed to die. But at the end of 30 days, I had a calendar with gold stars, filled with gold stars. I still have that calendar, by the way. And that gave me hope that there was something I could do to change my life. And that gave me permission to start asking questions that I've never asked myself. And that invited me to start thinking about what was really wrong with me, what was really going on. And that eventually led me to fear. Because if you would have asked me the day my parents died, if you would have asked me if I was afraid, I would have said no. If you would have asked me after my first suicide attempt, I would have said no. If you would have asked me after my third, I would have said no. Because I had no relationship to fear, scared, or afraid. Zero. So that exercise of doing those gold stars started creating a foundation underneath me where I could finally come to the realization that I was afraid. And that was the beginning of everything changing.
Wow. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. It takes a lot of courage to share um, a story like that because it's one that you're always going to remember, but you've literally taken one of the most traumatizing stories and you've turned them into purpose. But after experiencing trauma, we all go through a phase of running and running away from our fears. How long were you running away from your fears and how long were you running away from your pain?
I would say to different degrees. My parents died when I was 14. I ended up getting sober when I was 28, so about 14 years. And then it was another 6 years after that I really started moving into a more personal development, self-help. I was taking classes. I was doing a lot of things. Like, again, I never stopped doing things, but it was really at the 20-year mark where I started, well, let's just put it this way. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if God didn't intervene. So there's a God story there. But
Absolutely.
because I did not believe, even though now I'm sober, I'm doing work on myself. I'm belong to an organization where there was no such thing as coaches back then, but there was a little organization I belonged to that had like helpers, mentors, which were kind of coaches back then. And I was one of them. I was in a spiritual practitioner program, a 4-year program. So I was doing all of this stuff to transform my life, to make my life better. But never did I think that I would do this for a living, because I still believed fundamentally that I was that girl. And who's going to believe and who's going to want to follow or hear somebody who's been an alcoholic, tried to kill herself 3 times, and had 3 DUIs? Like, I really, really believed that that was not possible for me. And it was only with that intervention from God that I'm here today.
Yeah. I can totally agree to that. Like 100%, I think like I always had like relationship with God and like I knew he was real, but it wasn't until my darkest moments where I wanted to build a relationship with him, because now when I look back at certain situations from my personal life, like I can tell you like I wouldn't be able to be who I am without God. So having that faith relationship is so important, and no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, is before all of this and all of those events happened in your life, did you have a relationship with God, or is this something you discovered later down the road?
No, I wanted to be a minister when I was 13. So I was a God girl my whole, younger years. And so when I was 12, I read my first self-help book. And when I was 13, I announced to my parents that I was going to be a minister. And then when my parents died that day, I really believed that it was God testing me, because the very first thing I heard, okay, so I'm outside, my parents are here, they're now dead. And the first words I hear while the bullets are still, like the smoke is still going, is, won't give you anything you can't handle. Right? Except it was the actual quote from the Bible. That's a lot better than that. Right? But it was like, I will never give you anything that you can't handle. And I remember thinking to myself in that moment, excuse me? I mean, really? Really? You think I can handle this? And I remember feeling, okay, those are the first words I heard. And I was like, God, you've got the wrong gal. You've got the wrong gal. And so I never hated God or got mad at God for what happened. I just told God I couldn't trust him. So I put a line in the sand between me and God, and I put God over there, and I was like, God, love you, God. But I couldn't devote my life to him, because what I took away from that experience is that, well, then my sisters are going to die. and things are going to keep happening around me. They're going to be horrible to everybody I love. And I could not risk that. So I said, God, thank you, but no thank you. And I kept him there for almost 20 years, pretty much 20 years. And it was during that time when, because again, I loved him, never got mad. Hey, good job over there. But devote my life to him? No, no. And when I went into that spiritual program for a 4-year spiritual practitioner license, I was never going to become a spiritual practitioner. I just wanted to go and take classes. But for years, I would hear the word God, and I'd have to change it to spirit, light, source, universe, the field, because I couldn't hear the word God, because I loved God, but he didn't, but hey, this test is too big. So I couldn't even say the word God for almost 20 years.
It's so interesting that you say that quote. You said, you won't be given anything you can't handle. Because those are the words that I heard when I was going through my dark times. You won't be given anything you can't handle. A quick little background on me is I was in a really abusive relationship at a really early age. And I ended up marrying a guy who completely hated my guts when I was 21. And when I was 23, I just kept hearing God say throughout the whole relationship, you won't be given anything you can't handle. So take what you can learn from this. And when it's time to move on, you can move on. But until then, you can do it. And I think that it's such a beautiful thing, because even when we're at our lowest points, he's always there saying I got you, you can do it. When did you start to fully allow him? What was a defining moment that you finally started to fully allow him to work through you and in your life?
Well, 2 things happened, but the first one I'll tell you is that's really significant one. And then the second one is the miracle that had me go on the path today. But the first one was I was leaving. So God had been nudging me. He'd been like this. Hey, Rhonda. Hey, Rhonda. Hey, Rhonda. And I was like, God, I told you, back off. Constantly, Rhonda, constantly on me. And I remember leaving class one day, and it was pouring rain, and the classes were in West LA, and I lived in the Valley in Encino. And so I'm driving over the 405 for those of you who know LA, and it's pouring rain. So I get off on Mulholland, and I can barely see the road because it's so bad. And so I pull over actually into a church parking lot, unbeknownst to me. And the whole time I'm driving, God is literally Rhonda. And I couldn't take it anymore because it had been going on for a long time. And I literally couldn't take it anymore. I was like, the rain's going and I just can't take it. And God, leave me alone. So I pulled over and I literally said, God, back off. And God and I, when the Bible says God and I wrestled, oh yeah, we wrestled. I was in that car for 45 minutes having it out with God. And we had it out. And I basically said to him, I cannot come back to you because you're going to take my niece, you're going to take my nephews, you're going to take my sisters. And that 45 minutes, I don't know how else to say, but God and I wrestled. And finally I got to the point by the end of 45-minute mark about where I looked at God and said, I can no longer deny you. And if everyone has to die, so be it. Now, I know logically most people think, well, people weren't going to die, but then you don't understand how real that was for me. It was every cell in my body believed that tomorrow morning someone would be dead. And it was because I went back to God. So, wow. But it was 45 minutes, literally. I was exhausted when I got home. I was it was like me and God just had it out. And I just remember so vividly saying, I can no longer deny you. And I went to bed that night and I was petrified to wake up the next morning. And I still to this day have dreams when I'm going through a big change or going through a vulnerable spot in my life. I always dream that my youngest and most tiniest and petite niece is dying. And I still have those dreams to this day. because that's still alive for me. But I could no longer deny him. So then that's when I went back to God. Is that, but I would go to class, I would go to church, and I would do things before then. But every time I heard the word God, I just changed it to universe, light, source. I just couldn't say the name God. But that day, he wore me down. He wore me down.
Yeah, he's gonna keep coming, knocking on your door until you're ready to let him in fully.
And no, it's true.
It's so true. Wow. What did you start to do to stop running away from the fear? Because you finally allowed God in to work through you. What are some things that he had you and wanted you to do to start breaking through that fear and breaking through that trauma? Was it working on yourself, going to seminars, coaching other people?
Well, during all those 20 years, I was going to therapy. I was going to trauma therapy. I was doing shaman work. I was doing inner child work. I was reading books. I mean, I was doing everything. Okay. So what God did after that is I was in that spiritual practitioner program, and I was working I owned a little tiny PR agency. I was working for solo entrepreneurs. And one of my clients was one of the very first life coaches. And he would always tell me, "Oh, Rhonda, you're going to be a better coach than me." And I'm like, no, have you forgot about the suicides, DUIs, and alcoholism? I don't think so. But he would always say that to me. "Oh, you're going to be a better coach than me." And I would always say, "No, I'm not. I'm never going to coach. That you're a crazy person." And he was a genius, by the way. And so I ended up, and again, I don't even know how I knew this, but I started basically building his business for him. I basically built classes for him. I got him speaking events. I mean, I built his business. And we were at his house one day, and I'm sitting on the couch, and he's at the board, and we're brainstorming the next workshop that we're going to do. And this is that miracle woo-woo story. Out of the corner of my eye, the ceiling opens up. A cloud comes out. It has a book on it. And the book goes like this. Lays back down on the cloud and goes back into the ceiling. And I'm like, okay, what the heck just happened? I mean, what the heck? And now, mind you, it had a download, but I definitely didn't think it was for me, because don't forget, alcohol, DUIs, and suicide attempts. So I literally turned around to see who came in the door. I literally went like this. Somebody must have come in the door, and I accidentally heard it. Like I'm looking, there's nobody there. And then I look over at Paul, and he's writing on the board, oblivious to what just happened. And I am like, that message can't be for me, because the download was, I got the answer to every question I'd ever asked. And I was also told, you now must go and teach it. And I'm like, you got the wrong girl, God. And so the next day, thank the Lord, I had a appointment with my mentor, one of the ministers at the church I was in the spiritual practitioner program for. So I ran to her the next day, and I was like, okay, the sky opened up, the book came out, it went back to the sky, and I got this download, and it told me, every answer at every question I've ever had, and then it told me I have to go teach it. And she looked at me, she goes, "Oh, you got the call." I said, "What?" She goes, "You got the call." And I said, "Yeah, but, remember, I'm a trauma survivor, so I didn't finish college. I got to go back and get my bachelor's. I got to go get a master's, and I got to go to a PhD, and then I'll write a book. So I will be ready in 7 to 10 years. And she just looked at me and says, "Well, you got the call, so you're ready." I said, No, you didn't understand. I got to get my bachelor's, finish my bachelor's. I got to get my master's. I got to get my PhD, and then I'll write a book, and I'll be ready to 7 to 10 years. And she just kept saying, "You got the call, you're ready." And I'm like, again, you're not listening. Bachelor's, master's, PhD, book, And she just was unfazed. She goes, "Well, you got the call." And I had a difficult time accepting that. And it was only, like I said, an intervention, because that was the first intervention. And then I was helping my client build his business. And so I was wrestling this internally, like, what, I don't know, I can't do this. And one of my friends, I was trying to sign her up about 6 months later to take one of Paul's classes. So I'm like, "Hey, Paul's having a new class, and he's amazing. Come take this class." And she looks at me, and she goes, "Well, I want you to coach me." And I went, No. Paul is the coach. No. And she goes, "No, I want you to coach me." And I was like, and I remember being so baffled, but then I also had like, well, what if this is what, maybe this is what, it's like I surrendered because she was demanding that I coach her. And by the way, this was 30 years ago, and she's still a client of mine. She's one of my coaches and one of my students. And so I started coaching her. And in the beginning, I didn't trust the message God gave me because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I would have a session with her, right? And then I would run to Paul and go, she said this, I said this, she said that, I said this, and then she said that. What do I do? And then I would run back, have another appointment, then I'd run back to Paul and go, she said this, and I said this, and then she said that, and I said this. What do I do? Right? And I would do this back and forth. We didn't have like phones with, recorders back then, right? I had to take notes. And that lasted about 6 months. And then at about the 6-month mark, I realized I knew. And so I had 2 clients. I had one friend, my friend Lisa, who was my first client, and then another friend of mine, Jennifer, became my second client. And I did coach them for free, and I had to drive to West LA, so it cost me money every time because I'm driving all over town to coach with them at their house. And at about the 6-month mark, I was like, it clicked, like I knew what I was doing. And within 1 week, I had 20 clients.
Wow. I think that's incredible. It's also shows like when you have a call on your life, you can't run away from it.
Well, you try. I tried.
You try, but at the end of the day, that's a really, really great story of you can't miss what's for you. Because so many times we can get in our heads like, oh, I missed this job or I missed that opportunity. But the reality is that if it's meant for you, it will keep knocking on your door until you answer the call. So I love that how you explained that story and the way that you described it, because it's true. You will not miss what's meant for you.
Even though I really wanted to.
Even though you really wanted to, you couldn't. What are some non-negotiables that you implement into the people that you coach these days when you're teaching them to overcome fear? Like, what are some of like your key non-negotiables?
Well, the first thing is I don't see fear as the enemy. Like, fear loves you. Fear absolutely loves you. So there's no overcoming fear. There's really just building a relationship with fear. So I've created 2 models, and of course, God created them through me, called the Wheel of Fear and the Wheel of Freedom. And so I teach people how to navigate the maps of fear, because most of us just talk about fear in a generic sense. And that didn't work for me, just calling it fear. I mean, again, I was never afraid. I never had a relationship with the word fear or afraid or scared. So that didn't resonate with me. But as I started working with one-on-one clients, and then I started teaching classes, and it's when I started moving from one-on-one and then having multiple classes that it's really started unfolding. And I started understanding, basically from the download, I started to implement it in my classes, and then it started becoming something. And like I said, it started becoming what I call now the Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom. So the first thing is that fear is just a mechanism. It's just a system. And there's a particular pattern to it. And most people, myself included, don't understand the pattern. And so they just basically lump it into one box and call it fear. And most people I meet don't have a relationship with fear. They just don't. So the first thing I have to, even discuss with them about is what I call the fear responses. Because if I say I work with fear, people will be like, oh yeah, I don't have any. I'm like, yeah, sure you don't. And then I give them a little quiz. Happy to give you the quiz, give a quiz. And when I give them the quiz is when they go, oh, okay. Well, now I'm listening.
Because it's not always the spiders.
Yeah. It's just like they just think of fear as I'm afraid. And most people don't say they're afraid. So when I break fear down for them in a different way, give them that fear quiz, they start recognizing how often they are afraid. And it changes their whole thought process and the way they understand what fear is. And then they are very, very curious and very much want to understand their fear. Because now it's not a detriment or a betrayal or something wrong with them. It's literally just a mechanism. And when you see it as a mechanism, that moment then also eliminates shame, blame, beating yourself up. And so in the world of fearless living, there is no beating yourself up. And the number one thing I believe that people get when they discover their wheel of fear and wheel of freedom is the shame dissolves, because you really do get it's not you. And that's one of the key factors. Now, when you talk about my fundamentals, like my non-negotiables, is I teach my students and I teach my coaches, because I certify coaches, that the number one skill, coaching skill I teach them is to speak as if their client's innocent. And most people think they know how to do that or that they do that, but I dare say they don't. So I'm fanatical about speaking and connecting and coaching and teaching from a place of innocence. So that ties into what I said about fear. Like, you're not lazy or stupid or broken. You're just afraid. And if you really believe that, then there is no reason to ever beat yourself up. There is no reason to call yourself, you have low self-worth or low self-esteem, because that's not true. That's just fear talking. It's not true. So when people tell me they have imposter syndrome or they have, worth issues, I'm always like, I understand. I understand you think that, but that's just a symptom. It's not the real problem, And so people talk about these things. And again, I understand they feel real. I totally get that. But what I do is I go underneath that and really find the root. And so that they can see the root. So then that imposter syndrome or that, worth issue or that low self-esteem issue, those dissolve.
Yeah, that's so true. It's not always like the physical things. For example, like when you're younger, it's like the bug or, like physical things that you can see, but it's like fears, like, for example, rejection. Rejection could be a fear, right?
Rejection is a fear.
Yeah.
So there's something called physical fears and emotional fears.
Right.
And most people recognize physical fears. Most of us will say, yeah, I don't like heights. And everyone's like, yeah, me neither. Like, we don't have any shame. Most people don't have any shame about that.
Yeah.
But emotional fears, people have no clue about. So fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of loss, fear of loneliness, fear of judgment, right? So fear of not being good enough. All of those are emotional fears. And so when somebody tells me they're not afraid or I don't have any fear issues, what they're thinking of is physical fears. Because once I give them that darn quiz, they start recognizing how much emotional fear they have. And you and I can avoid snakes most of the time, and you and I can avoid going in heights. But if you're living in this world, it's very difficult, unless you're a hermit, to avoid hitting emotional fears.
Yeah, that's so interesting because it starts at such an early age that we don't even realize. For example, if you're in like middle school and you have a crush on somebody and then you tell your friend and they start making fun of you, then you start to build that fear of, oh, well, what if they're going to make fun of me because I like so and so or I like this music? And we don't even realize that we're building these fears and this anxiety around something that's not even in the physical. It's just what we're making up in our minds. So how do you help people overcome that fear of the emotions and the fear of being judged and made fun of?
Well, again, the first thing that I do is I help people understand what their fear responses are. So can I give you the quiz? Can I share the quiz?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think this helps people understand it a little bit better. So I'm going to read a list of words, and who's ever listening to us right now can go ahead, and if you're willing to shut your eyes, and if it's not safe, don't shut your eyes, because if you're driving, please don't shut your eyes. I'm going to read a list of words, and if you do any of these things or feel any of these things, I want you to nod your head. Okay, so here we go. Do you ever isolate? Do you ever pretend everything's okay when it's not? Do you ever hide out? Do you ever whine? Do you ever compare yourself? Do you ever manipulate, even secretly? Do you ever get defensive? Do you ever settle? Do you ever judge? Do you ever complain? What about procrastinate? What about people please? Do you ever wait and call it patience? Do you blame? Do you struggle? Do you worry? Do you deflect? Do you try to control? Do you ever feel bitter? How about entitled? What about powerless, resentful? Do you ever feel dissatisfied or disappointed? Do you ever feel guilty? What about, do you get caught in perfectionism? What about overwhelmed or indifferent? Do you ever get caught in self-pity? Do you ever feel ignored? What about irritated, like now, me reading these words? What about annoyed? What about victimized? Take a nice deep breath. You are not these things. These are just symptoms of fear. So I ask audiences when I give this to, whether it's 1,000 people or 100 people or private clients or groups, I ask, how much percentage did you nod? And the average percentage is over 90%.
Yeah.
So these are the symptoms of fear, and they're called fear responses. So what people do is they take their character flaws. Oh, I'm judging. I got to quit judging. Oh, I'm procrastinating. God, I got to get more ambitious. I got to quit judging myself, right? Oh, I got to quit manipulating. Oh, I'm such a control freak, right? Oh, I got to quit being a people pleaser. Got to put boundaries up. Right? All those things are symptoms of fear. So you are only judging if a fear has been ignited. You're only overwhelmed, fear is ignited. You only control if a fear is ignited. You only procrastinate if you have a fear ignited. You only complain if you have a fear. You only compare if there's a fear. So people focus on the symptoms, what I call the fear responses, and think those are their problems. But those, like I said, are only the symptoms. So the first thing I do with clients and future students is I ask them to start paying attention, because everybody knows, what they do, right? Everybody knows what they do. They beat themselves up for it all day long, right? So I ask them to write those things down and start keeping track of how often they do it and if they do anything else. And where beginning students go wrong is they think that it's a sign of evolution if they only have 3 fear responses. No, that's a sign of ignorance. What you want to do is have as many fear responses as possible. Even something, if you only do it once a year, write it down, because that's going to be key for you to be able to catch yourself when you're on what I call the wheel of fear. So the minute you can start identifying fear responses, the minute you can shift that negative beating yourself up or calling these character flaws or defects or my problems, and start relabeling them, redefining them, reframing them as fear responses, that starts giving you air, breeze, space to no longer judge yourself, so that the shame can melt away, so that you can start seeing, oh, fear is a mechanism all unto itself. Fear is doing that. I'm not purposely doing this to myself. Fear is having its way with me because it wants to keep me safe.
Yeah, that's so true. It's the fear is trying to keep you safe because you don't want to test against the emotions. Because one that really stood out to me that you said is, do you feel uncomfortable after I'm saying these? And I think that's also a fear as well, because it's like you're testing the waters of what's comfortable and what's outside of your comfort zone. So it just really gets me thinking, like, there is so much more to fear than what we think. But I always like to say the acronym for fear is false evidence appearing real. What's your perspective on that?
Well, on one level, it's true. On one level, it's true. But I don't know very many people who can whip that out when their amygdala is triggered in the middle of a fight with their spouse and say, false evidence appearing real, and use that to change their lives. So it's a clever saying when you're already calm, when you've already decompressed. But in the middle of a fight, in the middle of being judged, in the middle of being fired, in the middle of a broken family relationship, in the middle when you're frozen, when you're fighting, when you're freaking out, when you're faking, right? When you're fawning, what do? And false evidence appearing real, for most people, some people can, but most people, that is not going to get them through that moment to have them choose something different, to make a choice to what I call move on their wheel of freedom, to actually choose to live more true to themselves. Most people cannot pop that up. And that doesn't tell you what to do. right? False evidence appearing real. Again, I love it. Face everything and rise. Again, love it. But it doesn't tell you actually what to do. And when I was going through my 20 years, I read all the books. And you know what they said? Love yourself more. Well, how do you love yourself if you don't know how to love yourself?
Wow.
Get higher self-worth. Well, how do you do that? What are you talking about, right? They never told me how to do anything. Not really. They just told me what I should be doing. They didn't actually break it down. And so when I started the work on myself and started creating what I call now fearless living, it is all about the how, because I know what it's like to feel like I've read all these books and what the heck, why isn't it working? I did that for 20 years. And why aren't I better? Why isn't my life changing? I've done all the right things. Well, yeah, you've read Love Yourself, but you don't know how to love yourself.
Yeah.
Bubble bath's nice, but that's not loving yourself. It's a nice self-care act, but that's not loving yourself. So loving yourself is a radical act. And most people, if you have fear running your life and you don't know it, that will shut down your courage to love yourself in the face of somebody disapproving. So that's why, again, false evidence appearing real, love it. Face everything and rise, love it. But how do you do that when you're triggered? How do you use that in the middle of a fight? How do you do that when you're getting fired at work? How? And my experience is, again, love platitudes and love cliches, because cliches are what they are, because they work, because they're true, But again, they're inspirational, they're aspirational, but they didn't tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
They just told me what I should be doing, but not how to do what I should be doing.
Yeah.
And that's why God told me to create the Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom, because the Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom are the how. They're literally systems, step by step by step, to get you from here, step, 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 over here, step, step, step. So that's how I work with people. I work with the how. Like, how do you actually do this? Because I can inspire you. I can inspire you all day long and tell you amazing stories and be really motivational. But that's not going to change your life.
Absolutely. Rhonda, what does it mean for you to be nourished inside out, from where you once were to where you are now? What does it mean for you to be nourished inside out?
The word that's coming through me right now is sovereignty.
Okay. And how come?
Because to me, in order for me to nourish inside out, I must claim my sovereignty. Because the only way I can truly nourish myself is to be no longer at the effect of people's wishes, wants, and needs and dreams. Instead, I must be holding on to myself. Doesn't mean I don't have relationships, doesn't mean I don't love. But that how can you nourish yourself if you don't have sovereignty? Because it probably will get confusing what's nourishing if it negatively impacts somebody else. If you feel selfish doing it, right?
Absolutely.
So when you asked me that question, I just thought of sovereignty.
That's so beautiful. And Rhonda, can you please tell us, where can people find you, support you, and be on this journey with you?
Fearlessliving.org. And I'd love to give a bonus gift, a free gift. Go to fearlessliving.org/risk, RISK, fearlessliving.org/RISK. You're going to go put your name and email in, and you're going to get access to the platform to go ahead and take my course called Stretch, Risk, or Die. And what that is my client's very favorite, one of their very favorite exercises, one of their very favorite tools. And it basically gives you a roadmap anywhere you're stuck in your life, any time you want to make a dream happen, any way that you feel you're being held back, you can actually go and use this tool called Stretch, Risk, or Die, and it can help you move forward. Now, it is 3 videos, 15 minutes each, super easy. And I take you through the whole model, and it has templates and worksheets for all different types of issues. So if you're having relationship, health, finance, etc., family stuff, it's going to have templates for you to do. And also what it does, it also puts your to-do list on its ear and cures procrastination. So, and also the 3rd video, just a little bonus, is I actually go through my Wheel of Fear so you can see what the Wheel of Fear looks like in motion.
Wow, that's incredible. I'll have all of that linked down in the show notes below so people can stay in touch. Thank you for being on this show with us today. It's been an honor, Rhonda.
Thank you. And remember, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just fear.